Okay, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It's going to be a webinar on SB 1221 decarbonization pilot, so hopefully you're all in the right place. Okay, let's see, I'm going to check. Okay, so we have right here some notes on how you can ask questions during the presentation. We're going to be monitoring the chat, so you can pose questions at any time by putting them in the chat. Heather on our team is going to be monitoring those, and we'll be saving those to the end to pose them to Jean. You are going to be muted at the end if there's some issues with clarification. We can unmute people, but generally, it's for housekeeping. It's easier for us to manually manage these and then save them in the order which they're, and pose them to Jean in the order which they're presented. Okay. We're a few minutes past, so we're going to just get rolling. Can I go to the next slide, please? And next slide, please. Okay, quick note, this presentation is going to be recorded. If that's an issue for you, please log off. These are going to be saved. The presentation will be saved and available online later on our website. Additionally, closed captioning is available if you have problems hearing us. And go next slide, please. And reiterating here, the questions, please pose them in the chat at any time. We're going to be recording those and posing them to Jean in the order which they are submitted. And next slide. Here we go. Here's our overview. I'm Chris Moore. I'm with Local Government and Community Affairs. We are supporting this webinar with our IT department. And the meat of this is going to be presented by Jean Spencer, who's a supervisor over in our gas policy reliability branch in the energy division. And Jean's going to give a relatively brief summary of what's going on with the decision, and we're going to have extended time for question and answer, because that's really what we want. We've been getting a number of questions, and we think this is a good forum for people to pose these. Other people can hear them, and hopefully we can clarify some of the questions people are having overall with this. We go next slide, please. Quick overview on us, local government, community outreach. We are in external affairs. We are across the state, and we are kind of a first point of contact if you have questions about the commission. We also help clarify some of the more technical policy issues that are going on with the commission. And generally speaking, it's good to know who your liaison is if you're not sure who to go to, or you have just generally, have issues with what's going on with the commission. We're a good place to start, and we can help sort those things out. We can liaise with the energy division staff, and we can help you with the process questions around the commission as well. We'll go next slide, please. And here's our contact information. So feel free to screenshot this. This is also all available on our website. So if you look for business and community outreach with the CPUC, you should be able to pull all this up, and you can ping your local liaison. Okay, can we go next slide, please? Okay, so now we're going to get to the exciting part of this. We've got Jean Spencer. She's a supervisor in gas policy and reliability and energy division, and she is assigned to the long-term gas planning rulemaking, which includes this work on SB 1221. I'm going to hand it over to you, Jean.
Great, thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. All right, so As noted, I'm going to be discussing the SB 1221 neighborhood decarbonization pilot projects, which are being worked on in the context of the long-term gas planning rulemaking at the CPUC. I'm going to be giving kind of a high-level overview because the real purpose of this session is to hear from you and to respond to different issues that you raised to the best that we are able to do. So next slide, please. Before I get started, Legal Division did ask me to put out this disclaimer that this presentation is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this presentation creates new legal obligations or alters existing statutory or regulatory requirements. And any pilot project under SB 1221 would require a separate proposal, review, and approval by the California Public Utilities Commission. So this is just a staff level effort to kind of hear from different community groups and governments and individuals out there and to answer questions if we're able to. Next slide, please. So I'll be giving a quick overview on SB 1221. I'm going to be talking about how you can participate and also providing some links to additional information. Next slide. So as you're probably aware, if you're in this meeting, California adopted SB 1221 in 2024 to create a neighborhood decarbonization pilot project program. Among the issues in the legislation are that it can approve up to 30 projects statewide. They have to be cost effective. We're targeting areas with planned gas pipeline repair or replacement in the next 10 years. And this statute says that if 67% of property owners with natural gas consent to the zero emission alternative and the project is successfully implemented, the CPUC shall relieve the gas corporation of its obligation to serve. I think one thing that's important to note is that there was no funding included in the bill. I think there was the idea that there would be that existing programs could be used to help pay for these projects, and then potentially the money saved from avoiding gas pipeline repair work. So just wanted to make sure that's clear. Next slide, please. So there was a lot of intermediate deadlines in the SB 1221 legislation. One of them was that the CPUC needed to designate priority decarbonization zones by January 1st, 2026. So in December, the CPUC designated 151 initial priority zones in which projects can be considered. And we plan to update those zones by December 31st, 2026. So no later than December 31st. It's also important to note that zones are likely to be larger than projects. The zones are at the census tract level, which is, I believe it's something like 1,000 to 8,000 homes. And the project would be located within the census tract, not necessarily the whole census tract. Another of the initial deadlines or of the deadlines within the legislation is that by July 1st, 2026, the CPUC will establish a pilot project program for utilities to propose and implement up to 30 pilot projects. So the details of that pilot project program are to be determined in that decision. So, there's not a lot of specific questions about what exactly the program will include because that decision is still outstanding. Next slide, please. So the initial 151 zones were designated according to some of the mandates of the legislation. Specifically, how we did it for the initial cut was to look for zones where a local government or organization had requested that a census tract be designated as a priority zone. And then among those zones, there was 10% or more of the gas distribution main pipelines are scheduled for replacement in the next 10 years. And then we also capped the initial zones at 25 census tracts per county, except for tracts that had high Cal EnviroScreen scores. We let them in even if they would have exceeded the cap because that potentially represents a low income or disadvantaged community. Next slide, please. So you can participate in in this effort by attending this webinar. So thank you for being here today. The utilities are also required to hold information sessions between now and March 15th, 2026. That was a requirement of the December 2025 decision. So far, PG&E is the only utility that has hosted its information session. PG&E plans to have it on February 26th at 4 p.m. and I've included the link here. It's also on our SB 1221 webpage. Another way to participate is to request a priority zone in your area. You can file a comment in the docket at the link provided in the second item. Please include the 11-digit census tract number that you're requesting, as well as the organization making the request. And we'll take those requests into consideration when updating the zones. Another thing you can do is contact your gas utility to discuss the feasibility of a project in your area. You can also participate in the proceeding as a party by filing a motion for party status in the long-term gas planning rulemaking, which goes by the number R2409012. And the link to do that is in the last section here. Next slide, please. We also wanted to bring your attention to some other materials that are available. Another one of the requirements of SB 1221 was for the utilities to create maps of pipeline replacement projects by July 1st, 2025. Those were done and are posted at the link below. You can also, if you're interested in looking at the regulatory updates in the CPUC's long-term gas planning rulemaking, you can go to the link to the docket, which is provided in the second bullet, or you can actually subscribe to get real-time updates to the proceeding. So if you provide your contact information, you'll be sent all the documents that are issued that go into the docket of the proceeding. So that's all I have. I'm going to hand it over to Heather to go over logistics for the next part of this session.
Thank you, Jean. We have some questions that have been entered into the chat, and please continue to enter your questions into the chat. The first question is from Corey Downs. Can you provide more information about how funding will be, about how funding will be provided by savings from gas infrastructure? Funding these projects will be very important, and existing rebates and incentives are not able to meet the needs.
So that's one of the things that we're working through as we're working towards a proposed decision. Exactly how can this work? So I don't think there's much specific I can say about that. I do think the general idea of the legislation is to find a way to use the and again, I don't want to say too much because this is sort of all TBD exactly how this will work. But I think we're aware that the existing rebates and incentives are limited. And I think the idea of the legislation is to look to savings from pipeline replacement. And that's why there's the mapping, and that's why, in the zones, we're looking for zones where there are, a fair number of opportunities where there's pipeline replacements coming soon.
Okay, the next question, Jean. Could you please provide information on how the 151 zones break down across the categories shown?
So they all represent census tracts that were requested that have gas line and that have gas line replacement scheduled. So that they all have that to some degree, some to a greater, so some census tracts that were requested have, for say, 50% of the, I'm making up a number, but they have a greater percentage of the pipelines that need to be replaced, and some have a lower number. But those criteria are good for all the ones that were chosen.
And just to let the participants know, the slides and a recording of the webinar will be made available in a few days on our informational webinars webpage. Let's see, the next question is, how often does the CPUC anticipate it will update the initial priority zones? And can the CPUC or the utilities provide the information on how attendees can coordinate?
So we've committed to updating the initial zones by December 31st, 2026. There's not been a decision beyond that. I do think it's important to note that the window of SB 1221 is relatively narrow. Programs need to be established according to the legislation. I believe it's by January, before January 1st, 2030. I think I have that right, subject to check. So there is a limited window because once the utilities will identify projects in the zones, then they'll have to request approval of those projects from the commission, and then they will actually have to do the projects. So we will do at least one more. I don't know if we'll do another one after that. So in terms of the info, I know that there's a contact person along with the maps. I'm not sure if we have posted contact information for who to reach out to at the utilities beyond that. I was hoping I'd see Eileen here, who would probably know the answer to that, but I don't. So yeah, you could start with the contact person on the maps.
Hello, I can chime in. Yes, the contacts listed for the maps are also the contacts in general. So they're listed on the webpage.
And that's the SB 1221 webpage.
Yes.
The next question is, the IOU maps and initial priority zones by census tract are helpful, but how can we see street by street pipeline replacement projects?
Yes, so the utilities have stated that the street by street information is confidential, which is not to say that you can't see it. So what you would have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement or NDA with the utility to see the street by street information for your area. Because that is, you're correct that not every street in a census tract area has a pipeline project. So it is important information. And I think, we've been trying to find the balance between the confidentiality issues and making as much information available to people as possible.
Okay, thanks, Jean. The next question, can community groups request consideration of tract, and what weight is that given versus a request from a local government?
Yes, absolutely. They can request that. And I think what we're looking for is, that the community has, that there's kind of a critical mass of people in the community that are interested. So yes, a community group, absolutely. I don't think we differentiated between, weighting community groups versus local governments. We're looking for, kind of a groundswell of interest in a locality.
Okay, the next question is, who can submit a request for including a census tract in a county? Is it the county government, a city council? And I think that's just a follow-up question to the one you just spoke about.
Yeah, I would say it could be the county government, it could be a city government, it could be a local organization. Any of those are options.
The next question, are there currently active pilots now that focus on full neighborhood electrification has begun?
Not SB 1221 pilot projects, no. I know there's other programs that are out there that might have some active pilots, but not within this program.
Okay, the next question is, how will the CPUC evaluate the cost effectiveness of pilot projects under SB 1221?
So that's one of the critical elements of the proposed decision that that we're working on. So that's to be determined.
Okay. Thank you, Jean. The next question. I think there's been some lack of clarity regarding the ability to update with new zones before the end of the year for SB 1221 pilots, not just long range planning beyond SB 1221. Can you confirm that new zones are still possible for SB 1221?
Yes, new zones are still possible. That's why, I think there's some elements of the legislation that, we wanted to address more directly with some new zones that there just was not time to get to before December. So we do plan to do that, and they will be considered as part of the SB 1221 pilot project process.
Thank you. The next question, will the CPUC share drafts of the program guidelines and take public input before staff takes it to the commission for adoption in July?
No. I think one thing it's important for people to understand is that at this point we're on quite an accelerated timeline to get that decision out. I think there was a question somewhere about the meetings. I don't have the commission meetings memorized, but I think to get a proposed decision out for the May meeting, I think we have to mail by early April. And similarly, to get it out by a June meeting, we'd have to mail it out by early May. So there just isn't time to do the kind of, staff proposal or different things that could be done due to the accelerated deadlines mandated by the statute.
Thank you. The next question, could you provide some thoughts on how pre-development of pilot projects could be funded, or even broader education and engagement? Based on the initial priority zones submitted, there is a significant equity issue where rural areas are broadly not engaged in the process.
I think this is one of those things, there's no funding in the legislation at all. So there, I guess this was kind of a long question, and I'm not seeing it in the chat to kind of remember all the parts of it. I don't know if I'm just missing it. But given the accelerated timeline and, that there is not really funding for work like that at this point. So I don't know. I don't think that there's, I don't have a great response to that question, given the resource limitations.
Okay, Jean, thank you. The next question, what is the coordination between priority zone requests the CPUC receives and how that is coordinated with the utility?
Here, could you, I need a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just found the last question, and I just wanted to read it and make sure that I just kind of want to get back to it, just, pre-development of pilot projects. The utility might do some outreach, I guess, once we get the program elements defined. There may be something that happens later, but I think between now and when the July 1st deadline happens, there's really not time for much. But again, I don't know what will happen on the utility side in terms of outreach and education, or what could potentially be done after the July 1st deadline. I'm sorry, and what was the next question?
What are the coordinating activities? How are you coordinating, or the CPUC is coordinating with the utilities on priority zone requests?
So right now, the CPUC is working on the pilot project program itself. So that's, we coordinate with the utility. There was a scoping memo that asked questions of both the utilities and parties, that had a series of questions about what elements should be in the pilot project program. So I guess that would be how we coordinated. So we have the responses from both the utilities and the parties, and we're reviewing those responses as we work on creating the pilot project program. Once that is out, then there will be a next phase as we move towards implementation, and I don't know what that will look like at this point.
Thank you, Jean. The next question, can cities and organizations submit additional census tracts for consideration? Is there a cutoff date before the December 2026 date to be considered?
So yes, you can still submit census tracts for consideration. I don't think there's a cutoff date at this point. There may be one announced later that could happen. If you have census tracts in mind, there's no time like the present, to get your requests in.
We have, this is the next question. Will homeowners be made aware of any decisions about removing gas lines, as far as, so they know, if they're about to sell their homes?
So the information that's currently available is the 151 initial priority zones. And I just want to reiterate that among the priority zones, there's only 30 pilot projects. I just to clarify, if there's pilot projects that receive 100% community approval, they don't count toward the 30 project limit. So there could be more than 30 pilot projects if there are places where there is 100% approval. But for projects with less than 100% approval, there is a 30 project maximum. So you could look and see if your census tract is included in on the initial list. But even if your census tract is included on the initial list, you may not, because there may only be 10% of the pipelines within that census tract that are scheduled for replacement. So 90% of that census tract would likely not have an available project. And again, different census tracts have different percentages. So that's, that would just be the minimum. The utility would then, if they're going to, the utility has this, these options before them, they then would identify areas to advance these programs, and they would need to go, there is a requirement in the legislation that, for the 67% consent. So in order to, try to get that 67% consent, the utilities would need to communicate with the people in the project area about the fact that their area is being considered. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, the next question is, what is the criteria for replacing a gas pipeline? What is the average age of a pipeline that needs to be replaced?
So a lot of so if you look in a general rate case, which you probably won't do because they're quite long and complicated, but in the general rate cases, the utilities ask for a certain amount of pipeline replacements per year. Some of the categories that they are typically looking at are bare steel pipelines. So those are older pipelines like bare steel without cathodic protection, or Aldel A plastic pipelines of a certain vintage. So Aldel A pipelines have had some issues, some safety issues, particularly those. Because most of them were in the 70s to the very early 80s. So those pipelines are targeted for replacement. And so it would be the idea is that pipelines that are in those categories or in other similar categories that are targeted for replacement, typically in a GRC, would then some subset of those would be could be options for this program. And I think with pipelines, I think one thing that is important to know is that it's not necessarily the age, how old it is. A lot of times the material or the conditions of the pipeline are more important, like what's happened to it over the years. So age is not always the greatest criteria. Yeah, indicator. Good. Thank you for supplying me with the word.
All right. Oh, I missed my. Oh, okay. The next question is, where can we, I think you went over this, Jean, but where can a participant see the current maps being considered for gas removal? Is that on the SB 1221 implementation webpage?
So in the decision, which I think is linked to right above, I think there's a list of all the census tracts. I believe there's a map in there, but it's kind of at a general level because it's the whole, you know, it's a larger area. You can look for your county or your city and look at the census tracts and then compare that to a census tract map and see if your street is in that census tract. So that would be one way of doing it.
Thank you. The next question, is there a way to challenge the street by street is confidential statement?
Yeah, so the commission can override confidentiality, but they have to consider whether there are actually significant safety issues at play or other issues that could, you know, that could be important. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. The next question, how did the CPUC determine that a 10% threshold of gas main replacement scheduled is reasonable? Is there cost benefit data that can be shared with the public? Is there a risk that the percent of replacement indicated does not bear out, affecting the cost savings used to assess cost effectiveness?
So the 10% is basically an indicator that there is a significant threshold of pipelines that are available in or that will be replaced in that area. Whether that area will be chosen is another question. The cost benefit analysis will be done later. Yeah, so I mean, all these cost savings, those will be done on a project by project basis. Well, I guess that's that. I don't know that for sure, but I would assume, as a, you know, that that cost benefit analysis is going to be done at a later point. This was looking for geographic areas with a reasonable number of pipelines that could be addressed.
Okay, then thanks, Jean. The next question goes to the 67% of customers agree to the project issue. Who determines if that threshold is met?
So the utility would have to, you know, provide evidence that they have 67% of people in the project area approving the project. The exact manner in which that will happen would be something that would be decided in the decision. So I guess I can't really get into any detail about that, except that they would have to be able to prove that they got consent from 67% of the property owners.
The next question, how many requests have been submitted so far?
I do not have that number off the top of my head. Eileen, do you?
I do not off the top of my head either. They are from party requests and public comments, all of which are available online. That's something we would have to dig up.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer the next question, but the participant asks, will the current power grid in California be able to power these new electrical requirements?
So the adequacy of the electric electric capacity in the localized area was one of the questions that was in the included with the scoping memo. So that's something that parties have commented on, how we can address this question. And I think it's important to note that it will, I think a lot of this is localized, so it'll be important to look at the local level if that capacity is available.
Thank you. We have a funding question. In terms of funding, is there a difference between municipal public service pipelines and government operation only pipelines?
So I don't completely understand this question. So if this person wants to write a follow-up, I'll give it a shot, but I may be missing the crux of what's being asked here. So there are municipal gas utilities, not too many and kind of small, but they do exist. We do not have jurisdiction over them. So our jurisdiction is over the investor-owned gas utilities. The big ones are PG&E, SoCalGas, and SDG&E, and Southwest Gas. There's some smaller ones as well, but those are the big ones. So investor-owned utilities are funded by ratepayers. So that's what I've got on that one.
Okay, thank you, Jean. The next question, are there other recommendations for positioning our census tracts / neighborhoods for selection? For example, conducting specific engagement, talking with IOUs.
So if you're able to do public engagement to kind of take the temperature of people in that area to see if this is something that they're interested in, I mean, I think that would be great. And when you provide your census tract, when you provide your request, you could include that information if you have done that. Similarly, with reaching out to the gas utility to get a sense of where they are, if you're able to do that, I think that's great. I do just, want, again, people to kind of level set that, there's only 30 projects that don't meet the 100% requirement. So it remains to be seen how widespread, these will be. But if you have a relationship with the utility, I mean, it can't hurt. Yeah, and again, I just also want to add that if you can get to 100% agreement, then it doesn't count towards the 30 project limit. So if you are able to do, maybe to sign an NDA, see what the street level, where they are in your neighborhood, figure out a way to kind of find if people are interested, and kind of propose a package that might make your area. And again, I'm not exactly sure. That's well, I think, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. But if you could kind of provide evidence that you have this kind of popular support in your area, that you could provide to the utility and you could include it in your comments, I think that it would be helpful.
Thanks, Jean. The next question, how will the commission formally update the zones? Will it be through a decision?
Yes.
The next question. Can you accommodate zones where street-by-street evaluation identifies good prospects for a pilot-sized project, despite being in a census tract that does not have or does not meet the 10% requirement?
So I can't, there will be a new decision, and I don't know what that decision will adopt. So, I mean, yeah, so I'm not sure what will happen. That could be considered in the new decision.
Thanks, Jean. The next question, once pilot projects are selected, does the initial jurisdiction, for example, local government, that proposes zone play any kind of role? Will there be more coordination between the CPUC, the utility, and the proposing entity?
So again, a lot of this is TBD, and I can just kind of, I would assume, and I'm not a utility, but if I was a utility and I was interested in doing a project in a neighborhood and I see that an organization or a government has indicated that they're supportive of that, I think that's what I would do, is I would work with them, because I've got to get the 67% consent. But there's nothing laid out yet because again, the decision is not voted out.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question, is it correct that SB 1221 does not address funding of projects? This is another funding question. And that funding for electrification is up to the utility companies. If so, what kind of funding, if any, can communities expect to get from the utilities?
So again, this is something that's being worked out in the decision. I mean, I think the general idea of SB 1221 is to see if there's a way to take the funds that would be spent on replacing the pipeline project or replacing the pipeline and using it for electrification. Exactly how that could happen is something that will be addressed in the decision.
Thank you. Next question. When it comes to electrification, is this program working with community choice aggregators to ensure procurement of renewable energy sources?
So this is something that would be in the decision, although I don't believe there was any kind of question like this in the scoping memo questions.
We have another funding question. If there isn't funding from this included in this legislation, how are the utilities going to fund the pilot programs?
So again, this is something that's TBD, but I think, again, the idea is that, as I mentioned before, in the general rate case, the utility asks for funds to replace pipelines like Aldel A pipelines or Bear Steel pipelines. And so the idea would be, rather than doing that, that some of those, that funds be used to behind the meter again. But a lot of this is TBD, but I think that's the general idea. There is, the utilities do plan to replace these pipelines, and they do request money for that in the general rate case. So is there a way to kind of make a shift there?
Oh, can I jump real quick? There's a comment in there from Corey Downs that a few people seem to connect with too. Is in terms of concern, there was concerns that people will propose and then the funding, they get people worried about the projects and they wouldn't come through. Are we going to be, in terms of the decisions or anything, do we have any consideration of that?
So again, this is, I'm glad we're doing this because I can see there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions, but I think unfortunately from our end, I can't talk about what's being discussed internally at the commission. I can only talk about things that are public. So how exactly this would be done is really TBD. Sorry, could you repeat the question again? I get started and I'm much better when I can see it in writing than if I just hear it.
I can pull I can pull up the direct comment. I think there's a really big risk of proposing projects like this and getting community members concerned about losing gas appliances without clear funding in place to provide replacements.
Okay, so I think, I don't, it's a hard answer. So again, I think the idea is that there is to find a way for there to be funding. Exactly how that could happen is TBD. In terms of getting people either excited or upset about this about this prospect, I think that's one of the issues. So that is just, you know, presumably there would be some manner in which the utilities would propose the projects that they're interested in, and then the commission would have to review those projects and have some kind of way of approving them. So during that period between when it's proposed and when it's approved, there will be uncertainty for the communities about whether it will actually go forward. Similarly, right now, there are people who are in census tracts that I have been identified as initial priority zones, but you don't know whether your census tract will be chosen, and even within that census tract, whether your street would be a street that's chosen. So I think there is some uncertainty, and I think that is a challenge because on either end, like people are excited, and then maybe what happens if it doesn't get approved? That's disappointing, or else they really don't want it, and then they're worried about it, and they're waiting for that outcome. So there is just a certain amount of lag that's just a part of the regulatory process that I think is that's not there's not a way around that.
Thank you, Jean. The next question is the CPUC still considering revising the screening criteria for identifying priority zones? How does the CPUC feel about giving more weight to requested census tracts with active building decarb electrification efforts relative to those with a general expression of interest?
So again, we will do a decision updating the zones. What will be in that decision at this point is TBD.
Thank you. The next question, can funds from the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program be used for pilot projects under SB 1221?
So I would say that SB 1221 encourages the use of non-ratepayer funds, which I think that would fall into, but I think the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program has slightly different criteria. So if there was a way for those things to overlap, I mean, SB 1221, as I said, encourages the utilities to look for non-ratepayer funding where possible.
Thank you. The next question, for pilot projects, isn't it the case that all affected households must have alternatives to natural gas in place prior to decommissioning?
So I don't want to get into too much of a legal question here. I mean, it does say that 67% of property owners have to agree. And I think, again, don't have this memorized, but there's also language about it being implemented before that happens. So the exact details of this, I think, are going to be in either this decision or in sort of the implementation process.
Thank you. The next question, will parties be prompted to comment on what kind of direction should be considered to ensure that projects are high road projects as directed by SB 1221?
So I believe there were some questions about that in the scoping memo. So parties have commented on that.
Thank you. The next question, the accelerated deadline is very concerning to local governments that often fall victim to the unfunded mandates. The lack of clarity in the bill and the many unknown elements of the overall objectives is also concerning. Is there anything you can share that can reassure local governments that our communities will not be negatively impacted in the long run?
So yeah, I can't do much about the accelerated deadline or how the bill was written. In terms of, I think one of the requirements of it is that these projects need to be cost effective. So I think the bottom line is that we would expect people to be at least as well off, if not better off, if these projects are done. So I'm not exactly sure what negative impacts this questioner is concerned about. So I'm not exactly sure what to address there, but I mean, I think the idea is that at the very minimum, they have to be cost effective for everyone. So the customer and also for the non-participating customers.
Thank you, Jean. The next question, what is the difference between foreseeable gas projects and the priority zones?
So, as I mentioned in the general rate cases, the utilities have pipelines that they're considering, or that they want to replace. They have ongoing replacement projects to kind of schedule the replacement of pipelines so that, because you have to stagger those replacements over years because it's a lot of work to replace a pipeline and a lot of money. So they do a certain number every year. So one of the things that we did with the maps that were due last July was they had to identify pipelines that were could be considered for replacement in the next 10 years that were sort of the highest priority pipeline by year if possible. And I think some utilities did a little bit more by year than others. So the foreseeable gas projects are gas projects that in the normal course of business, the utility would be planning to replace those pipelines. The priority zone may be larger than that. So as we discussed at the beginning, one of the requirements for the initial zones was that there at least 10% of the pipelines within the zone are scheduled for replacement. So there could be 90% or some other percentage of pipelines in the zone that the utilities are not planning to replace because maybe they're not bare steel or they're not 1973 all delay. So that's the difference. There could be other pipelines in the zone that are not would not be replaced in the normal course of business.
Thank you. And here's another mapping question. How do I see, or how does anyone find out if their particular address is being included in a project?
So right now, the best thing you can do is find out what census tract you're in, and then take a look at the decision from December and see if your census tract is included in the priority zones.
Okay, the next question, if a project receives 100%,
sorry,
receives 100% approval and it is thus not considered a pilot, which rules would then apply for who pays and how much for the electrification of the home?
So I think that's something that we'll have to work through in a decision.
Okay, the next question. Is there a slide or a web page that shows the timeline for this initiative?
I don't think we have a timeline. You can look at the statute itself, which has a lot of intermediate deadlines, as I mentioned. There's a requirement that the program be, set up by July 1st of this year. There is a sunset date. I believe it's January 1st, 2030. There's some reports that are required. So, and then what beyond the things laid out in the statute, the other incremental milestones are TBD.
Okay, the next question asks about any relation of SB 1221 to PG&E Zonal Electrification Pilot Program. This zonal electrification pilot was implemented after SB 1221 legislation, or was it active? Was it implemented after?
I'm trying to look at these slides in real time, and I don't know that I can do that. It does talk about SB 1221, so I can't look at that and comment in real time. So PG&E does have, I think it's an alternative energy program that was approved in its general rate case that allows it to basically do something similar to SB 1221 to take funds for a gas project they would otherwise do and use it to fund behind the meter electrification or other ways to not have to do that pipeline upgrade. So they have done that in the past at a relatively small scale.
Thank you. The next question, are cities that operate their own utilities eligible? For example, the city of Palo Alto.
So I think Palo Alto has its own gas system. I might have that wrong. I think the legislation is really focused on gas corporations, regulated by the PUC. So again, that would be the big ones: PG&E, SoCalGas, Southwest Gas, SDG&E. There are overlaps there. So PG&E, the gas company, overlaps with SMUD, the electric company. Similarly, in Southern California, SoCalGas overlaps with LADWP and others. So I think when there's a gas corporation involved, that seems like it could be definitely, well, again, I don't want to be too definite. I would imagine that would be possible if it's a public utility that's a gas company, like a public gas utility. I don't think this would apply, but I am not a lawyer.
Thanks, Jean. The next question, what incentive does the utility have to create and implement and fund these programs?
Well, that is one of those things that are TBD.
We are getting close to time here, so I do not see us getting through all these questions, and Jean's being a champ here and handling a lot. So, I just, one thing to reiterate is, how can people stay informed about this going forward? Should people be signing up for the service list, Jean? Or is there?
Sorry, I'm getting little pop-ups from other places. Yeah, you can sign up for the service list. You can check our SB 1221 webpage. I would refer back to the slides that provided different ways to participate at different levels of commitment. You could be a party to the proceeding if you wanted to.
And again, the slides and the recording will be uploaded to the informational webinar webpage in a few days.
I'd like to reiterate also that we're here. We're also going to be available to help with questions after this. It looks like with the volume of this too, we may want to pull together some kind of FAQ document too, which we can support with Jean, as just so we have some sort of record of all this stuff, because there's just a lot here, and people are clearly highly engaged in this. Okay, we're at time. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions here. I think it's really, I hope this was helpful to everyone. There's clearly a high level of interest in this, and yeah, clearly a lot also still to TBD. Can we go next slide, please? Here's a few resources overall with the PUC to help with our information is shared. I think you can always find the BCO on there if you want to contact us. We can help in liaising with the gas team on this. We're also going to follow up and see what the best way to reach people with this afterwards. Also, the slides and the recording are going to be available online, so people can review those afterwards. And the slides have a lot of good information on how to stay informed on this as well. Jean, did you have anything you wanted to say in closing here?
I guess I just, I'm just scanning the chat and I see there's, questions about the mapping. So the census tract numbers are available. There's not a map because there's thousands of census tracts in California, so it's very difficult to create a map that would fit on a page. But you can look up your census tract. I'm just seeing if there's any last little. There's a lot here. So I do think your idea of maybe trying to do frequently asked questions could be helpful. But again, you know, a lot of these questions are going to need to wait until we have a decision for this proceeding.
Okay, thank you for joining us today. I'm, you know, hopefully glad we got through some of these questions here. There's still a lot remaining. We'll discuss and we'll figure out how to best move forward with this as well. So, thank you. Hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks for attending.